A disrespectful waiter turned away an elderly veteran from his restaurant, thinking he was just another burden to avoid. The next morning, four black SUVs surrounded the building with a dozen uniformed soldiers stepping out. But what they discovered about the rejected veteran's true identity would change everything forever. I was cleaning tables when I saw something that made my stomach feel sick. Jake, the youngest waiter at our restaurant, was walking toward an old man sitting alone at table 12. The old man wore a green military jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His hand shook a little as he held the menu, and I could see deep lines on his face that told stories of a hard life. The morning rush was over, and our restaurant was only half full. Empty tables sat everywhere, with clean white tablecloths waiting for customers. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air, and soft music played from the speakers above. It should have been a peaceful moment, but something felt wrong. Jake stopped at the old man's table and crossed his arms. I couldn't hear what they were saying from where I stood, but I could see the old man's hopeful smile. He pointed to something on the menu, probably asking about the breakfast special we had posted on the board near the front door. That's when Jake shook his head and said something that made my blood run cold. I moved closer, pretending to wipe down the table next to them. That's when I heard Jake's cruel words clearly. "Sorry, sir, but we're completely booked today. You'll have to find somewhere else to eat." The lie hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked around at all the empty seats at the quiet dining room that could easily fit 20 more people. The old veteran's face changed in an instant. His hopeful smile melted away like ice in the sun. His shoulders dropped, and he slowly closed the menu with hands that trembled even more now. He didn't argue or get angry. He just nodded quietly and started to stand up from his chair. "But sir," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted some coffee and maybe some eggs. I have money to pay." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn wallet. Even from where I stood, I could see it wasn't very thick. Jake's face showed no kindness at all. "Like I said, we're full. Try the diner down the street." He turned his back on the old man and walked away, not even bothering to help him to the door. I wanted to run over there and tell the veteran he could sit anywhere he wanted. I wanted to pour him the best cup of coffee we had and cook him the biggest breakfast on our menu. But Jake was the owner's nephew, and everyone knew he could do whatever he wanted without getting in trouble. I had bills to pay and couldn't afford to lose my job. The old man stood up slowly, like his bones hurt. He put his wallet back in his pocket and straightened his military jacket with pride, even though someone had just treated him terribly. As he walked toward the front door, I noticed other things about him. His boots were old but clean and polished. His hair was combed neatly. This wasn't someone who didn't care about himself. Other customers in the restaurant had seen what happened too. A woman at table 6 shook her head in disgust. A businessman reading his newspaper looked up and frowned. Even the cook, Maria, peeked out from the kitchen with angry eyes. Everyone could see this was wrong, but nobody said anything. The veteran reached the front door and put his weathered hand on the silver handle. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, making his gray hair shine. For a moment, he stood there without moving, like he was thinking about something important. Then he turned around one last time. His tired eyes found Jake, who was now laughing with another waiter about something. The old man's voice was quiet, but every word was clear and strong. "Son, you don't know who you just turned away, but you will. This morning, you made a choice that you're going to remember for the rest of your life." Jake stopped laughing and looked confused. "Whatever, old man. Just leave already." But the veteran wasn't done talking. His voice got a little stronger, and there was something in his tone that made everyone in the restaurant listen carefully. "I've been to 3 wars, boy. I've seen things that would make you cry. I came here this morning hoping to find some kindness, some respect. Instead, I found you." The whole restaurant was quiet now. Even the soft music seemed to fade away. The old man continued. "You think you know everything about people just by looking at them. You think that jacket makes me worthless. You think my age makes me less than you. You're wrong about all of it." Jake rolled his eyes, but I could see he was getting uncomfortable. Some of the other customers were staring at him now, and not in a good way. The veteran straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Jake one final time. "This isn't over, son. What goes around comes around. You'll see." Then he pushed open the door and walked outside into the bright morning sunshine. I watched through the window as he climbed into an old pickup truck. The truck was clean, but clearly had many years on it. As he drove away, I caught sight of his license plate, and my heart nearly stopped beating. The license plate read VT, 1975, and suddenly everything about this morning felt different. I stood at the window watching that old pickup truck disappear down Main Street, and a terrible feeling grew in my stomach. Something told me this wasn't the end of the story. I walked back inside, where Jake was already joking with Tommy, another waiter, about what had just happened. "Did you see that old guy's face?" Jake laughed. He thought he could just walk in here and get free food or something. Probably one of those fake veterans you hear about. Tommy looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, man. He seemed pretty real to me. Did you see all those patches on his jacket?" "Anyone can buy that stuff at a thrift store," Jake said, but his voice didn't sound as confident as before. "Besides, even if he was real, so what? This is a business, not a charity." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Jake, we had plenty of empty tables. Why couldn't you just serve him?" Jake's face got red with anger. "Because I'm the manager here, and I decide who gets served. Mind your own business, or you can find another job." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I knew Jake meant it. His uncle owned this place, and Jake had gotten 3 other workers fired in the past year just because he didn't like them. I had a daughter starting college next month, and I needed this job more than I needed to be right. But that didn't make me feel any better about what I had just watched. The next few hours crawled by like they were moving through thick honey. I served coffee to businessmen, brought pancakes to families with little kids, and smiled at everyone who came through our doors. But my mind kept going back to that old veteran and the way his face had looked when Jake turned him away. Around 11:30, the lunch crowd started coming in. The restaurant filled up with the usual mix of office workers, construction guys on their break, and retired folks who liked our daily specials. I was carrying a tray of sandwiches to table 15 when I heard something that made me freeze in place. It was the sound of car engines. Not just one or two, but several, all arriving at the same time. The deep rumble was different from regular cars. These sounded bigger, more powerful like trucks or SUVs. Maria, our cook, was the first one to look outside. "Hey," she called out from behind the counter, "you all better come see this." I set down my tray and walked to the front window along with several customers. What I saw made my heart start beating so fast I thought it might jump right out of my chest. 4 black SUVs were pulling into our parking lot at the same time. They moved together like they had practiced this before, parking in a perfect line facing our front door. The windows were so dark I couldn't see inside, but I could tell these weren't ordinary vehicles. "What do you think that's about?" asked Mrs. Peterson, one of our regular customers who came in every Tuesday for our meatloaf special. I didn't answer because I was too busy watching. The engines all shut off at exactly the same moment, like someone had given a signal. For a few seconds, everything was completely quiet except for the normal sounds of our restaurant. Then the doors started opening. Men in military uniforms began stepping out of each SUV. Not the kind of uniforms you see at the Army store, but real ones with sharp creases and shiny buttons. These men stood straight and tall, and they moved with the kind of purpose that made you want to get out of their way. I counted them as they gathered in our parking lot. 12 men total, all of them looking serious as they formed a group near the front door. Some were older, with gray in their hair and lines around their eyes. Others were younger, but carried themselves with the same confident way. Then the driver's door of the first SUV opened, and my legs almost gave out completely. It was him, the same old veteran that Jake had turned away just 3 hours ago. But he looked completely different now. Instead of his worn green jacket, he wore a crisp military uniform covered with more ribbons and medals than I had ever seen in my life. His shoulders were straight, and his head was held high with pride and authority. This wasn't the tired old man who had asked for coffee and eggs. This was someone important, someone powerful. He walked to the front of the group and said something I couldn't hear through the window. All 12 men nodded and began walking toward our front door in perfect formation. Jake, who had been wiping down tables near the kitchen, finally noticed what was happening. His face went from confused to worried to absolutely terrified in about 3 seconds. The dish rag fell from his hands, and landed on the floor with a wet slap. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." The front door opened, and the old veteran walked in first. Behind him came all 12 uniformed men, filling our small restaurant with an energy that made everyone stop talking and stare. The veteran's eyes found Jake immediately, like he had known exactly where to look. When he spoke, his voice was strong and clear, nothing like the quiet tone from earlier that morning. "Good afternoon," he said to the entire restaurant. "My name is Colonel Samuel Martinez, and I believe one of your employees has something to explain." Colonel Martinez stood in the middle of our restaurant like he owned the place, and suddenly Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The 12 uniformed men spread out around the dining room, not threatening anyone, but making it clear they weren't just visiting for lunch. I watched Jake's face turn 3 different shades of white as he realized the old man he had insulted was now standing in front of him wearing enough medals to fill a jewelry store. The colonel's uniform was perfect, with creases so sharp they could cut paper and buttons that shine like mirrors. Colonel Martinez said, pointing directly at Jake, "You're the young man who told me this morning that you were too busy to serve a customer." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We were really busy, sir. I didn't mean any disrespect." The colonel walked slowly toward Jake, his boots clicking on our tile floor with each step. Every person in the restaurant watched in complete silence. Even the coffee machine seemed to stop making noise. Busy, Colonel Martinez looked around at all the empty tables that had been empty this morning, too. "Son, I've been in charge of men for 40 years. I know what busy looks like, and I know what lying looks like, too." One of the younger soldiers stepped forward and whispered something in the colonel's ear. Whatever he said made the colonel nod and look even more serious than before. "Jake, isn't it?" the colonel asked. "Jake Morrison, nephew of the owner." Jake's eyes got huge. "Why do you know my name?" "I know a lot of things," Colonel Martinez said calmly. "I know you've been working here for 8 months. I know you've been rude to other customers before today. I know you think your uncle's money makes you untouchable." The whole restaurant was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Mrs. Peterson was holding her coffee cup halfway to her mouth, frozen in place. The businessman with his newspaper hadn't turned a page in 5 minutes. Even the little kids at Table 9 had stopped coloring in their books. "Sir, I'm really sorry about this morning," Jake said, his voice shaking. "If I had known you were... If you had known I was what?" Colonel Martinez interrupted. "Important? Rich? Powerful? So you only treat people well when you think they can help you." Jake didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there looking like he wanted to crawl under the nearest table and hide. The colonel turned to face everyone in the restaurant. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your meals, but I want you all to understand something important. This morning, your employee here decided I wasn't worth his time. He looked at my old clothes and my gray hair and decided I didn't deserve basic human kindness." A woman at table 4 gasped. "That's terrible." "It is terrible," Colonel Martinez agreed. "But it's also fixable. Everything in life can be fixed if people are willing to learn from their mistakes." He walked back toward Jake, who was now sweating so much his shirt was getting damp. "Son, do you know what these ribbons on my chest mean?" Jake shook his head quickly. "This one," the colonel pointed to a blue ribbon with white stars, "is the Medal of Honor, the highest award this country can give to a soldier. I got it for saving 12 men during a battle in Vietnam when I was not much older than you." The restaurant got even quieter, if that was possible. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. "This one," he pointed to another ribbon, "is for my service in Desert Storm. And this one is from Afghanistan, where I lost many good friends fighting for your freedom to treat old veterans like garbage." Jake's face was now completely white. "Sir, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Colonel Martinez said. "Because you didn't bother to ask. You didn't care enough to find out. You saw what you wanted to see and made your decision." One of the soldiers near the window cleared his throat. "Colonel, should we proceed with the next phase?" My stomach dropped. "Next phase? What did that mean?" Colonel Martinez nodded. "Yes, Sergeant Williams. Please make the call." Sergeant Williams pulled out a phone and stepped outside. Through the window, I could see him talking to someone, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. "What's happening?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're about to learn that actions have consequences," the colonel said, "and that sometimes those consequences are bigger than you ever imagined." The front door opened again, and Sergeant Williams came back inside. He walked straight to Colonel Martinez and whispered something that made the colonel smile for the first time since he'd arrived. "Excellent," Colonel Martinez said. Then he looked at Jake one more time. "Young man, your uncle should be arriving here in about 10 minutes. It seems he's very interested in meeting me." Jake's face somehow got even whiter. "My uncle? How did you?" "I told you, son. I know things. And your uncle, Robert, is about to learn some very interesting information about his restaurant and his nephew." The next 10 minutes felt like the longest 10 minutes of my entire life. Jake paced back and forth behind the counter like a caged animal, while Colonel Martinez and his men waited patiently at various tables around the restaurant. The other customers whispered among themselves, but nobody left. This was better than any movie they could have watched. I tried to keep working, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, but my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped a whole tray of dishes. Every time the door opened, everyone looked to see if it was Jake's uncle arriving. Finally, a silver BMW pulled up fast in the parking lot, and a short, heavy man in an expensive suit jumped out. Robert Morrison, the owner, looked like he was having the worst day of his life as he hurried toward the front door. "Uncle Rob," Jake called out the second his uncle walked in. "Thank God you're here. There's been a huge misunderstanding." Robert Morrison stopped dead in his tracks when he saw 12 uniformed soldiers sitting in his restaurant. His eyes found Colonel Martinez immediately, and I watched his face go through the same changes Jake's had gone through earlier. "Are you Robert Morrison?" Colonel Martinez asked, standing up from his chair. "Yes, sir, I am. I own this establishment. There seems to be some kind of problem with my nephew." "Your nephew is part of the problem," the colonel said, "but not the biggest part." Robert Morrison loosened his tie, which was already cutting into his thick neck. "Sir, whatever Jake did, I'm sure we can work something out. He's young, and sometimes he makes mistakes." "This wasn't a mistake," Colonel Martinez said firmly. "This was a choice. Your nephew chose to humiliate a veteran in front of a room full of people. He chose to lie about being busy when he was clearly not. He chose to judge someone based on their appearance instead of their character." I watched Robert Morrison's face as he tried to figure out how much trouble he was really in. His restaurant was his whole life. He'd built it from nothing 15 years ago, and everyone in town knew he was proud of it. "Colonel," Robert said, reading the name tag on the uniform, "I sincerely apologize for whatever happened. Jake will be disciplined, I promise you that." "Disciplined how?" Colonel Martinez asked. Robert Morrison looked around the room nervously. "Well, I'll talk to him. Make sure he understands how to treat customers with respect. Talk to him." The colonel's voice got harder. "Mr. Morrison, your nephew has been rude to customers for months. This isn't his first time. Talking clearly isn't working." Sergeant Williams stepped forward and handed Colonel Martinez a folder I hadn't noticed before. The colonel opened it and pulled out several pieces of paper. "Mr. Morrison, are you aware that your nephew has caused this restaurant to lose at least 15 regular customers in the past 6 months?" Robert Morrison's eyes got wide. "What? No, that's not possible. Mrs. Janet Phillips, age 73, used to eat here every Sunday after church. She stopped coming after your nephew told her she was taking too long to order." Colonel Martinez read from the papers. "Mr. David Chun, local business owner, brought clients here for lunch meetings. He stopped coming after your nephew ignored his table for 20 minutes while he talked to friends." The list went on and on. I had no idea anyone was keeping track of these things, but somehow Colonel Martinez had information about every rude thing Jake had done for months. Robert Morrison's face got redder with each name. "Jake, is this true?" Jake couldn't even look at his uncle. He just stared at the floor and nodded slightly. "There's more," Colonel Martinez said. "Your nephew has also been stealing from the cash register. Small amounts, but theft is theft." "That's not true," Jake shouted, but his voice cracked when he said it. Sergeant Williams pulled out his phone and showed the screen to Robert Morrison. "We have security footage from the camera across the street. Your nephew has been recorded taking money from the register 12 different times in the past month." Robert Morrison looked like he might faint. His successful restaurant, his family reputation, everything was falling apart in front of a room full of witnesses. "What do you want from me?" Robert Morrison asked quietly. Colonel Martinez closed the folder and looked directly at the restaurant owner. "I want you to make a choice, Mr. Morrison. The same kind of choice your nephew made this morning." "What kind of choice?" "You can choose to keep protecting someone who is destroying your business and disrespecting the customers who pay your bills. Or you can choose to do what's right." The whole restaurant waited for Robert Morrison's answer. Jake looked like he was about to cry. The other customers were barely breathing. "If I fire Jake," Robert Morrison said slowly, "will this all go away?" Colonel Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Mr. Morrison, firing your nephew is just the beginning. We need to talk about something much more important." "What could be more important than this?" The colonel gestured to his men, and they all stood up at the same time. "We need to talk about the future of this restaurant. You see, I'm not just a retired military officer. I'm also a businessman, and I've been looking for a good investment opportunity." Robert Morrison's mouth fell open. "Investment opportunity? I'm prepared to make you an offer for this restaurant, Mr. Morrison. An offer that could change your life forever." Robert Morrison's hands were shaking as he stared at Colonel Martinez, trying to figure out if this was the best news of his life or the worst. "You want to buy my restaurant?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just buy it," Colonel Martinez said, pulling out a business card that looked more expensive than anything I'd ever seen. "I want to transform it into something this community can be proud of." I looked at the business card over Robert's shoulder and nearly choked on my own breath. It read, "Martinez Holdings Incorporated, CEO Samuel Martinez," with a logo that looked like it belonged on a skyscraper in New York City. "You're a business owner?" Robert asked, still trying to understand what was happening. "I own 17 restaurants across 3 states," the colonel said calmly. 2 hotels, a construction company, and a chain of auto repair shops. When I retired from the military, I didn't retire from working. I just changed uniforms. Sergeant Williams stepped forward with a briefcase I hadn't noticed before. He opened it on the nearest table, revealing stacks of papers and what looked like official documents. "Holy cow," whispered Mrs. Peterson from table 4. "This is really happening." Colonel Martinez pulled out a folder from the briefcase and handed it to Robert Morrison. "This contains my offer for your restaurant, Mr. Morrison. I think you'll find it very generous." Robert opened the folder with trembling fingers. His eyes got bigger and bigger as he read the numbers on the first page. Then he sat down hard in the nearest chair like his legs had given out. This is 3 times what this place is worth," Robert stammered. "It's what this place could be worth," Colonel Martinez corrected. "With proper management, better training, and a focus on treating every customer like family." Jake, who had been standing frozen by the cash register this whole time, finally found his voice. "Uncle Rob, you can't sell the restaurant. This is our family business." Robert Morrison looked at his nephew with eyes full of disappointment and anger. "Jake, you've been stealing from me and driving away customers for months. You've embarrassed our family name and nearly destroyed everything I've worked for. But I can change," Jake pleaded. "I promise I'll be better." Colonel Martinez turned to face Jake directly. "Son, promising to change after you get caught isn't the same as actually changing. Real change happens before anyone is watching, not after everyone is watching." One of the younger soldiers, a man with sergeant stripes on his sleeve, raised his hand slightly. "Colonel, should I explain the employment terms?" "Yes, Sergeant Davis." "Please do." Sergeant Davis stepped forward with another folder. "Mr. Morrison, part of this offer includes keeping most of your current staff with raises and better benefits. However, there would be some immediate changes in personnel." Everyone in the restaurant leaned forward to hear better. I felt my heart start beating faster, wondering if I was about to lose my job too. "Jake Morrison would be terminated immediately," Sergeant Davis continued. "His behavior has created a hostile work environment and damaged the restaurant's reputation beyond repair." Jake's face went from white to red to purple. "This isn't fair. You can't just come in here and ruin my life." "You ruined your own life," Colonel Martinez said quietly. "Every choice you made, every customer you disrespected, every dollar you stole, those were your decisions. Now you get to live with the results. Robert Morrison was still staring at the papers in his hands like he couldn't believe what he was reading. Colonel, this offer is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why? Why do you want this particular restaurant? The colonel was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the dining room, where everything had started just a few hours ago. Mr. Morrison, I've been coming to this town for 6 months, visiting my grandson who lives here. Every time I came, I heard people talking about this place. Some said the food was great, but the service was hit or miss. Others said they stopped coming because of bad experiences. He walked over to where I was standing and put his hand on my shoulder. But I also heard people talk about certain employees who made them feel welcome, who remembered their names and their favorite orders, who treated every customer with respect, regardless of how they looked or how much money they had. My cheeks got hot with embarrassment, but also with pride. I had always tried to treat everyone fairly, even when Jake made it difficult. This restaurant has good bones, Colonel Martinez continued. Good location, good food, and most importantly, good people working here. It just needs better leadership. Robert Morrison closed the folder and looked up at the colonel. What happens if I say yes? If you say yes, we sign the papers today. You get your money, Jake finds a new job, and this place gets a fresh start with new management. And if I say no, Colonel Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a mean smile. If you say no, I respect your decision and walk away. But Jake still has to go. The theft alone is enough for criminal charges, and I have witnesses to his treatment of customers. Robert Morrison looked at his nephew, who was now crying quietly by the coffee machine. Jake, I love you because you're family. But family doesn't mean you get to treat people badly and face no consequences. Please, Uncle Rob, Jake begged. Give me one more chance. I've given you dozens of chances, Robert said sadly. Every time a customer complained, every time I told you to be nicer, every time I covered for your mistakes. I can't do it anymore. The restaurant was so quiet, I could hear the ice machine humming in the kitchen. Everyone was waiting to see what Robert Morrison would decide. Colonel Martinez walked back to the table where Sergeant Williams was waiting with more papers. Mr. Morrison, I need an answer. My lawyers are waiting to finalize everything, but only if you're ready to move forward. Robert Morrison stood up slowly, still holding the folder with the offer. He looked around at his restaurant, the place he'd built from nothing, the place that had been his whole life for 15 years. Colonel Martinez, he said finally, I have one question before I decide. What's that? Who would be the new manager? Colonel Martinez smiled as he looked directly at me, and suddenly I felt like the floor was moving under my feet. That's an excellent question, Mr. Morrison. I've been watching how this restaurant operates for months, and I know exactly who should be running this place. My heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. There was no way he was talking about me. I was just a waitress who had worked here for 2 years, trying to pay my bills and save money for my daughter's college. The new manager, Colonel Martinez announced, will be someone who has shown consistent respect for every customer who walks through that door. Someone who works hard, shows up on time, and treats this job like it matters. Robert Morrison looked confused. Do you have someone in mind from outside? No, the colonel said, still looking at me. I have someone in mind from right here. Suddenly, every eye in the restaurant was staring at me. Mrs. Peterson smiled and nodded. The businessman folded his newspaper and gave me a thumbs up. Eva Maria poked her head out from the kitchen with a huge grin on her face. Me? I squeaked, my voice coming out like a mouse. You want me to be the manager? I've been watching you for 6 months, Colonel Martinez said. Every Tuesday morning, I sat in my car across the street and watched how you treated customers. I saw you give free coffee to the homeless man who comes by on cold mornings. I watched you help Mrs. Peterson when she dropped her purse and spilled everything on the floor. I saw you cover extra tables when other servers called in sick, and you never complained once. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. Nobody had ever noticed those things before. I just did them because they felt right. But I don't know anything about being a manager, I said. I've never run a business or handled money or done schedules or any of that stuff. Sergeant Williams stepped forward with another folder. That's why we're offering complete management training. 6 weeks of classes, a mentor to help you learn, and a team of experienced people to support you. 6 weeks of paid training, Colonel Martinez added. At twice your current salary. My legs almost gave out completely. Twice my salary would mean I could help my daughter with college without taking out huge loans. It would mean I could fix my car and maybe even move to a better apartment. I don't understand, I said, wiping my eyes with my apron. Why me? Why would you trust someone like me with something this important? Colonel Martinez walked over and stood right in front of me. Because character matters more than experience. Because kindness matters more than knowledge. And because you've already been managing this place, you just didn't have the title or the pay. Robert Morrison was watching this whole conversation with his mouth hanging open. Colonel, are you saying you want to buy my restaurant and put my waitress in charge? Your former waitress, the colonel corrected. And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Jake, who had been quiet for the past few minutes, suddenly exploded with anger. This is insane. You can't give my family's restaurant to some nobody waitress. She doesn't know anything. She knows how to treat people with respect, Colonel Martinez said firmly. Something you never learned. But she's just a waitress. Jake shouted. And you're just fired, the colonel replied calmly. Two of the soldiers stepped closer to Jake, not threatening him, but making it clear his outburst wasn't welcome. Jake looked around the room for support, but every face showed disappointment or anger toward him. Mr. Morrison, Colonel Martinez said, turning back to the owner, I need your decision. My offer stands, with the management change as discussed. Robert Morrison looked at me with new eyes, like he was seeing me for the first time. You really think she can do this? I know she can, the colonel said confidently. But more importantly, she wants to do this for the right reasons. She cares about this place and the people who come here. I felt like I was in a dream where everything was happening too fast to understand. An hour ago, I was just trying to get through another shift. Now I was being offered the chance to run the whole restaurant. What about the other employees? I asked. Maria in the kitchen, Tommy and Sarah who wait tables? What happens to them? Colonel Martinez smiled wider. They all keep their jobs with raises. Good people deserve to be rewarded, not just the people who cause problems. Maria called out from the kitchen. You better say yes, girl. You've been covering for everyone else around here for 2 years. Tommy, who had been watching everything from behind the counter, nodded enthusiastically. You'd be a great manager. You already help train new people and fix problems when things go wrong. I looked around at all the faces staring at me. The soldiers, the customers, my co-workers, Robert Morrison, and even Jake, who looked like his whole world was falling apart. I need to ask one more question, I said to Colonel Martinez. What's that? If I mess this up, if I can't handle being a manager, what happens then? The colonel's face got serious. Then we figure out how to help you succeed. This isn't about setting you up to fail. This is about giving someone with a good heart the chance to make a difference. Robert Morrison walked over to the table where all the papers were spread out. He picked up a pen and looked at Colonel Martinez one final time. Colonel, if you really believe in her, then I'm ready to sign these papers. The whole restaurant held its breath as Robert Morrison put the pen to paper. But just as he was about to sign his name, the front door burst open and someone rushed inside, changing everything once again. A young man in military uniform rushed through the front door, breathing hard like he had been running. Everyone in the restaurant turned to stare at him, and Robert Morrison froze with his pen, still touching the paper he was about to sign. Grandpa, the young soldier called out, looking directly at Colonel Martinez. I got your message and came as fast as I could. My brain felt like it was spinning in circles. Grandpa, Colonel Martinez had a grandson who was also in the military? The colonel's serious face broke into the biggest smile I had seen from him all day. Marcus, you made it just in time. He walked over and hugged the young man tightly. And for a moment, he didn't look like a powerful businessman or a decorated war hero. He just looked like a grandpa who loved his grandson. Marcus stepped back and looked around the restaurant, taking in all the soldiers, the frightened-looking Jake, and Robert Morrison still holding the pen over the papers. Grandpa, what exactly is happening here? We're about to make some very important changes, Colonel Martinez said. Changes that will affect a lot of people in this town. I stared at Marcus more closely, and something about his face seemed familiar. He was tall and thin, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. There was something about the way he stood, the way he looked around the room, that made me think I had seen him before. "Marcus," Colonel Martinez said, "I want you to meet the person who's going to be running this restaurant." He gestured toward me, and I felt my cheeks get hot with embarrassment again. Marcus walked over to me with his hand extended for a handshake. "It's very nice to meet you," he said politely. "My grandfather has told me a lot about this place." I shook his hand, still trying to figure out why he looked so familiar. "Nice to meet you, too," I said quietly. "Actually," Marcus said, his smile getting wider, "we've met before. Many times." My heart nearly stopped. "We have. Every Tuesday morning for the past 6 months. Table 9, black coffee, no sugar. Sometimes I order the blueberry pancakes, sometimes just toast." The room started spinning around me. Table 9, Tuesday mornings. The quiet young man who always sat alone in the corner, who always said please and thank you, who left good tips even when he only ordered coffee. "You?" I whispered. "You're my Tuesday regular." "That's me," Marcus said, his smile now huge. "And you're the waitress who always made sure my coffee cup never got empty, who remembered that I don't like sugar, who asked me how I was doing even when the restaurant was busy." I felt like I was going to faint. "But you never said you were related to." "I wanted to see how people really acted when they didn't know who I was," Marcus explained. "Grandpa asked me to check out this place after he heard mixed things about it around town." Colonel Martinez nodded proudly. "Marcus has been my eyes and ears here for months. Every week, he told me about the good service and the bad service. He told me about employees who cared and employees who didn't." Jake, who had been quiet during this whole reunion, suddenly spoke up. "Wait a minute. You mean he was spying on us?" "Not spying," Marcus said calmly. "Just being a customer. And customers notice how they're treated." Colonel Martinez walked back to where Robert Morrison was still standing with the pen in his hand. "Marcus told me there was one employee here who always went out of her way to make people feel welcome. Someone who treated a young soldier eating alone like he was the most important customer in the place." My eyes filled with tears as I remembered all those Tuesday mornings. Marcus always seemed a little sad, a little lonely. I had tried to be extra kind to him because I thought he might be homesick or going through a hard time. "I gave you free coffee refills," I said to Marcus. "And sometimes I brought you extra butter for your toast without you asking. And you always asked if I was okay," Marcus added. "Not because you had to, but because you cared." Robert Morrison cleared his throat loudly. "This is all very touching, but I still have papers to sign here." Colonel Martinez turned back to the business at hand. "You're right, Mr. Morrison. Marcus, I want you to witness this signing. This restaurant is about to have new ownership and new management." Marcus looked surprised. "New management? Your Tuesday waitress is going to be the new manager," Colonel Martinez explained. Marcus's face lit up like someone had turned on a light inside him. "That's perfect, Grandpa. She's going to be amazing at this." "You really think so?" I asked, still not believing any of this was real. "I know so," Marcus said. "You made me feel welcome here every single week, even when other employees ignored me or rushed me along. You made this place feel like home." Sergeant Williams stepped forward with more papers. "Colonel, we need to finalize the employment contracts and the training schedule." "Employment contracts?" I asked. "Plural." Colonel Martinez looked at Marcus, then back at me. "Did I forget to mention that Marcus will be your assistant manager?" My mouth fell open. "What?" "I'm getting out of the military next month," Marcus explained. "I've been looking for a job, and when Grandpa told me about this opportunity, I knew it was perfect." "You want to work here? With me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I want to help make this place the best restaurant in town," Marcus said. "And I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with." Jake, who had been getting angrier and angrier during this whole conversation, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're giving our family restaurant to strangers." "They're not strangers," Robert Morrison said quietly. "They're customers. Customers who cared enough about this place to invest in it." Colonel Martinez picked up the pen that Robert had set down and handed it back to him. "Mr. Morrison, are you ready to sign?" Robert took the pen and looked around the restaurant one more time. His eyes stopped on Jake, who was crying now, then moved to me and Marcus, then to the other employees who were watching everything with hope in their eyes. "Colonel Martinez," Robert said slowly, "I have one last request." "What's that?" "I want to stay and watch this place succeed. Not as the owner, but as a customer. I want to see what it becomes under new management." Colonel Martinez smiled and nodded. "You'll always be welcome here, Mr. Morrison." Robert Morrison put the pen to paper and signed his name with a flourish. The moment he finished, the whole restaurant erupted in applause. Mrs. Peterson was crying happy tears. Tommy and Sarah were hugging each other. Even some of the soldiers were clapping. But the biggest surprise was still coming, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my new life. As the applause died down and everyone started talking excitedly about the changes coming to the restaurant, Colonel Martinez walked over to me with a serious expression on his face. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," he said quietly. My heart sank. After everything that had happened, was it going to be bad news now? "What is it?" I asked nervously. Colonel Martinez looked at Marcus, who nodded like they had already talked about this. "The reason I chose this restaurant, the reason I've been watching this place so carefully, isn't just about business." It's not. 6 months ago, Marcus came home from his last military assignment. He was struggling with some difficult memories, some hard times he had experienced overseas. He was sad, lonely, and having trouble adjusting to normal life. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the floor with tears in his eyes. "The military doctors call it PTSD," Colonel Martinez continued. "Post-traumatic stress disorder. It affects many soldiers when they come back from war zones." Marcus looked up at me with watery eyes. "Those Tuesday mornings when I came here, I was having the worst days of my life. Some days I didn't want to get out of bed. Some days I didn't want to talk to anyone or go anywhere. My heart broke for him. All those mornings when I thought he just seemed a little sad, he was actually fighting a much bigger battle. But you always came here anyway," I said softly. "Because you made it feel safe," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "You never asked too many questions. You never made me feel weird for sitting alone. You just brought me coffee and treated me like a normal person." Colonel Martinez put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. Marcus told me that this restaurant was the only place where he felt comfortable being around people. He said there was one waitress who made him feel human again. Tears were streaming down my face now. "I just try to be nice. I didn't know you were going through such a hard time." "That's exactly why it mattered so much," Marcus said. "You were kind to me when I felt broken. You smiled at me when I couldn't smile back. You made me feel like I was worth caring about." Sergeant Williams, who had been quietly organizing papers at a nearby table, looked up and spoke. "Ma'am, what you did for Marcus probably saved his life. There were some very dark days when this restaurant was the only reason he left his apartment. I felt dizzy hearing this. All those Tuesday mornings, I was just doing my job and trying to be friendly. I had no idea I was helping someone through such a difficult time." Marcus started getting better. Colonel Martinez continued. "Week by week, month by month. He started talking more, smiling more, getting interested in life again. And he kept telling me about this special place and the special person who worked there. So when I heard that the same restaurant was having problems with rude employees," Marcus added, "I knew we had to do something. This place saved me. Now I want to save it." Robert Morrison, who had been listening to this whole conversation, walked over to me with tears in his own eyes. "I had no idea," he said. "I never knew how much difference one employee could make." "Now you know why character matters more than experience," Colonel Martinez said. "This woman has been managing people's hearts and spirits for months. Managing a restaurant is just the next step." Jake, who was still standing by the cash register looking defeated, spoke up one last time. "So, this is all about feelings? About being nice?" Marcus turned to face Jake directly. "It's about treating people like they matter. It's about understanding that everyone who walks through that door is fighting some kind of battle. And your job is to make their day a little bit better, not worse." "When you turned away my grandfather this morning," Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger, "you weren't just being rude to one old man. You were disrespecting every veteran who ever put their life on the line for this country. You were showing that you don't understand what service means." Colonel Martinez walked to the center of the restaurant and addressed everyone who was still there. "Ladies and gentlemen, This restaurant will reopen in 2 weeks under new management. Everyone is invited to come back and see what this place can become when it's run by people who truly care. Mrs. Peterson raised her hand like she was in school. Will the prices stay the same? The prices will be fair, Colonel Martinez said. Good food, good service, and respect for every customer who walks through the door. Sergeant Williams handed me a folder with more papers than I had ever seen in my life. These are your management contracts, training schedules, and employee handbooks. You'll start your training next Monday. I stared at the folder, still not quite believing this was really happening to me. What if I'm not good at this? What if I mess everything up? Marcus stood beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. Remember what you told me on that Tuesday morning when I spilled coffee all over myself? I thought back and smiled slightly. I told you that everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is how you clean them up and move forward. Exactly, Marcus said. And you won't be doing this alone. We're going to be a team. Colonel Martinez looked around the restaurant one final time. Jake, you need to clean out your locker and leave. Your employment here is terminated immediately. Jake looked at his uncle one last time, hoping for support that didn't come. Robert Morrison just shook his head sadly. Jake, I love you, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your choices anymore. As Jake walked toward the back to get his things, Colonel Martinez turned to me with a smile. Are you ready to start the most important job of your life? I looked around at the restaurant that had been my workplace for 2 years and would now be my responsibility. I thought about my daughter starting college, about Marcus finding hope in dark times, about Mrs. Peterson and all the other customers who deserve to be treated with kindness. Yes, I said, my voice strong and clear for the first time all day. I'm ready. And as I said those words, I realized that sometimes the most ordinary moments, serving coffee, clearing tables, treating people with basic respect, can lead to the most extraordinary changes in our lives. Sometimes being kind to one person can change everything, not just for them, but for yourself too.